I've been hearing about this one particular young man all day.
Every great album should have a signature song. As a YouTuber so often discussing music, that's pretty much a rule of thumb I live by. Now, I'm all for the occasional ambient drone project or Andre 3000 flute album where every song kind of melds together or goes on for long enough to be considered an album in itself. But there is nothing quite like a song that can instantly transport you into a great record. The kind of song that becomes a big word microcosm of the album surrounding it. When I think Good Kid, I think Sing About Me. When I think Nevermind, I think Teen Spirit. Recalling Mama's Gun, I hear Green Eyes, Thriller, that iconic title track. And the list goes on. Monumental, stellar albums, all of them defined so clearly for me through a single song. These tracks capture, in the kind of bite-sized package I can throw onto a playlist, the full artistic genius of the larger works they fit within. And I'd argue I'm not the only one who sees songs in this way. There's a reason that when you bring up an album like, let's say, Future's DS2, you're setting yourself up to hear not some deep thoughts about the druggy haze of the record, its major impact on the foundations of trap music, but instead someone's personal rendition of Future laying pipe in some Gucci flip-flops. Songs create moments, and moments are what last in the cultural conscious. They are what we remember. I mean, shit, last year's biggest cultural moments were all about songs. Singles played over and over again throughout the whole summer that, when listened to now, help us to engage with an entire era where hip-hop changed forever. And what the song is to the album, the scene is to the film. Of course, comparisons between film and music cannot be one-to-one. These are, after all, radically different mediums with radically different constraints and norms. But I don't think it's crazy to assert that films, like albums, can be broken down into emblematic pieces, the kind of pieces that stick with us more than anything. Nothing instantly brings to mind the macabre body horror and uncomfortable tension of Alien for me more than the chestburster scene. Nothing speaks to Get Out's unsettling atmosphere quite like our introduction to The Sunken Place. Nothing throws me back into my endless love for Across the Spider-Verse more than watching the heartbreaking and visually stunning argument between Gwen and her dad towards the film's end. A moment I've already talked about on this channel multiple times because it sticks with me just that much. When a scene can so clearly define and embody a film, it kind of becomes that film in a sense. It becomes the cultural staple we associate with it, the thing that gets replicated and homaged and parodied for decades to follow. Maybe you've never watched Psycho, but you know that shower scene. Maybe you've never seen Carrie, but you know that prom disaster. And I think there's an impulse to view that as a bad thing, to see a film being stripped down to one scene as a means of reducing it. But I couldn't disagree more. Where a great film can etch itself into the bones of culture, a great scene can tattoo itself on the skin. Scenes offer the kind of immediacy, the kind of accessibility and limited time commitment that can turn them viral. And if a creative team can somehow turn that viral scene into a full embodiment of their film and of its ideals, well, then your film will capture the moment. That kind of scene is an elusive one, especially in our modern film era where big moments seem to mean less and less. But earlier this year, I had the pleasure of experiencing one of those scenes in real time for myself. And sure, there are now countless think pieces and video essays written about the scene, the kind of stuff that could very well sway someone's opinion on its importance. But this is a scene I saw opening day. And sitting in that theater before the movie even went off, without a single ounce of manipulation one way or the other, I knew that in this last year of film, in about the last decade of cinema, no scene hit quite like Sinner's barn burner rendition of I Lied to You.
Hold on. Tell me who you are. Where you from?
Spoilers for Sinners. Duh. If you've seen Sinners, as I've come to believe like 90% of the human population now has, you might could understand my perspective. The scene hits you like a brick wall. It's so undeniably beautiful and propulsive and chill-inducing. It's one of those moments that strikes you viscerally and sears itself into your head. It's a pretty standard scene at first, one I don't think you even need much context to understand. Sammy is a guitar player in 1930s Mississippi. He's doing a performance at a lively party of the time, and he does a damn good job of it. Sammy's vocals paired with the guitar alone are enough to entrance, but about a third of the way into the scene, his playing reaches across time, and his rendition of I Lied to You gives way to a genre-bending combination of Black music from across the eras. And it just hits, plain and simple. Like all the best scenes, it's so damn enjoyable on its surface that you can't help but take it home with you, and I most certainly did. And taking the scene home, I kind of figured it was worth some deeper thought. I mean, the subtext of the scene, if you can even call it that, about art and its power to break down barriers of time, culture, and repression, all of that sits pretty obviously on the face of the moment. Hell, on the face of Sinners as a whole. And with more and more time away from the barn burner, with more time to reflect on Sinners, the ideas within it, and how those ideas are conveyed to us as the audience, I began to appreciate Sammy's song more and more. Pretty soon, it became the only moment I could think about in relation to the film, because I started to realize it not only embodied the movie as a whole, but damn near summarized the entire plot, albeit in a subtle way. This truly might be the best cinematic scene of this decade. It's definitely towards the top in the last quarter century, if you ask me. And that's because Sinners is a damn good film, and this scene is Sinners. It's all the film's ideas, its themes, even its narrative progression rolled into a single untouchable moment. This is a video about that small part of Sinners, an attempt at understanding the 6 minutes of footage that are still stuck in my head months after I first saw them, which, as we'll come to see, is really to say that this video is an attempt at understanding Sinners as a whole.
They call me preacher boy, counting my daddy being a pastor.
Sinners' defining moment begins simply enough. Sammy being called to perform by Delta Slim, a fellow blues player and another major character in the film. Sammy begins to strum and is immediately halted by Slim, who encourages him to introduce himself to the crowd. The scene then becomes a grounding of his character, all his major traits, and the context he exists within. Sammy is an aspiring blues player, a sharecropper in the Jim Crow South, and the son of a preacher who wants Sammy to steer far, far away from the blues. He's at a kind of crossroads, trying to push for his art in the face of two worlds that seek to hold him down in different, if related, ways. There's the subjugation of racism, felt even when it's not seen, and then the subjugation of his father, of fitting the role deemed as right within his own community. Sammy's song, I Lied to You, which he jokingly says he wrote for his father, is a further compounding of who he is and what his character desires. I heard fellow YouTuber Morbid Zoo say it functions almost as an I Want song in a musical, and I think that's hitting the nail directly on the head. To quote from it, they say the truth hurts, so I lied to you. Yes, I lied to you. I love the blues. Shout out Morbid Zoo's video on Sinners, by the way, one of my favorite creators on YouTube, period. Sammy is a character stuck in between worlds, and his great escape from that predicament is art, creation, and the community it fosters. First in this scene, we learn him and all his different identities, and then we see past all of that to get a window into the beauty Sammy can create once he starts to play. I see this first third of Sinners' most central scene as a kind of first act, a neat establishment of the world and the central character who will take us through a musical and visual odyssey as the scene develops. It brings in many different ideas, crafts a fascinating sandbox to play in, but doesn't quite make a point of it yet. It doesn't try to elevate what's presented to us, merely introduce it. And in that way, the scene functions not so dissimilarly from Sinners as a film. One of the most talked about elements of Sinners is just how long the first act is. It kind of defies conventional wisdom in film that the audience doesn't want to spend too much time on establishing characters, their relationships, and setting the stage for action to come. General practice asserts that the action is the point. Doubly so in an increasing world of IP films, oftentimes flashy excuses to make expensive toys fight one another. But in Sinners, we don't see that prioritization of big action moments, at least not for a while. In fact, you could watch Sinners for about an hour and probably forget that it is, at its core, a vampire horror movie. Instead, you'd be led to believe it's like a hangout film. We open on Sammy distraught, beaten, and bloody, returning home to his father's church, a hint that something wicked is to come. But when we flash 24 hours into the past and truly begin the film, you'd be surprised just how long that wicked thing on the way just kind of looms in the background. Instead, we're properly introduced to Sammy, much like we are in the barn burner scene, and then we get to meet his cousins, twin brothers Smoke and Stack, who have returned from a life of crime in Chicago to make money selling illegal alcohol and running a juke joint in their hometown. Next, we meet Grace and Bo, Chinese immigrants running the local general store, who Smoke recruits to help in setting up the juke joint. We meet Delta Slim, a fellow blues player of the South who I've already mentioned in this video. We meet Pearline, a kind of love interest for Sammy who's
married, by the way.
And Mary, a white passing woman with a multiracial background who grew up alongside and dated Stack until a falling out after he tried to protect her by pushing her away. We meet Annie, the estranged wife of Smoke with whom he had a child who tragically died years prior. And we meet the most important character of all, Cornbread.
God dog, what happened?
All these major players take time to introduce, as each is given a reason to find their way to the juke joint later in the movie. A careful network of character relationships and motivations are laid out for us. And even then, when the juke joint is finally constructed and all these characters brought together, they still spend plenty of time interacting with one another and further developing the relationships and motivations we've already established. When the second act does come, it's nearer to the halfway mark of the film, bringing us back to our focus, the barn burner scene. Funnily enough, the very moment that ushers us from the more casual, groundwork-laying first act into something more chaotic, eventful, and substantial in the second. Perhaps that's part of why this scene feels so much like a reflection of the wider film around it, because it quite literally finds itself split between a major divide in the movie. I think the start of this scene feels like the start of Sinners, partially because it lives in that segment of the film. It's preoccupied with introductions, with the clear and plain, with context and setup, because that's what so much of Sinners' first hour is, before Sammy's performance takes us into something new. But I don't think that's the full story. Part of how this scene parallels the rest of Sinners is undeniably intentional, deliberate, more than some coincidence or happy accident. My proof? Well, it lies in what comes next. How the scene goes from mirroring what's come so far to foreshadowing and setting up what's yet to come. As with the movie that surrounds it, Sinners' best scene is nothing if it can't take all this setup and make it mean something. Take it in a radically fascinating direction. And luckily for us, we don't have to wait long for that switch. Sinner's second act is unquestionably kicked off with the sound of a single electric guitar tone, as Sammy's once quaint performance of I Lied to You evolves into something almost magical, signified by flashbacks and narration from both Annie and Delta Slim, who speak to the transcendent power of music and those select few players who can use their art to call out through time. In the film already, there have been moments, brief glimpses into art and community building as powerful forces. As the juke joint is crafted, we see a montage of characters, both those introduced to us in the film's first act and those who we're less familiar with, uniting as they create a kind of safe haven in the Mississippi backwoods. Their joy, the simple beauty of their construction, suggesting something deeper at play, although it goes unexplored. There's a particularly affecting scene where Delta Slim recounts the story of a local man's lynching, and his cries of pain morph into a blues song all their own. It hints at the power of art, specifically the importance of art for marginalized peoples, but the film is careful not to dwell for too long. On a first viewing, these moments might feel dissatisfying. But to know what's yet to come is really to know why the film holds back. All of it builds to that guitar note, the moment where a woefully out-of-time rocker joins Sammy, and we, as the audience, start to realize Sinners is far more than a film about getting drunk with your friends and killing the occasional vampire. Side note, I promise y'all I'm gonna get to the vampires in like 3 minutes. Soon after the electric guitar player comes, we're met with 80s-style break dancers, traditional African performers, and drum players, old school DJs, a segment that incorporates trap music and what feels to me like New Orleans bounce, G-funk, and then we even get a peek at traditional Chinese dancers when we catch up with Bo and Grace, highlighting Sinner's interest in exploring all different types of marginalized communities and how creation unites them all. In this moment, Sinners really starts making some strong statements about art, creation, and its relationship with the societally oppressed. Just at the jump, we can already tell that the film sees artistic expression as an extension of culture and shared experience for the likes of Sammy and our other main characters. I think we can also tell that the film sees that expression as something with real power, the ability to reach through time and become this kind of immortal, invincible thing. A concept that becomes doubly powerful considering how the film puts us in an era of such prejudice and racism. Art, community, and creation become things that cannot be destroyed, no matter how hard the outside world might try to. But to get the full message of what Sinners is presenting, to understand the film's views on its central topics and the true importance of this moment, how a simple switch into different musical genres can embody the meat of this film, we need to talk a little about the most central element of the movie not captured in this oh-so-emblematic scene. That, of course, being, as promised, the vampires.
Well, we believe in equality.
I wasn't originally going to make this its own section of the video, but in writing on Sinners, you come to realize that the vampires are really the key to making sense of everything. And they work in such a specific way in this film for very deliberate reasons, all of which are worth exploring, all of which eat up YouTube runtime. Thus, a mini chapter. Now, the vampires of Sinners don't really appear in the film's opening act. We're way too concerned with setting up our characters and physically getting them to the juke joint for all of that. But the brief glimpse we do get into the film's central antagonistic force during all this setup, well, it's very telling. Remick is Sinner's main villain, an Irish vampire who first shows up cowering outside the home of white clan members and preying on their racial prejudice for the purposes of his own self-protection. It instantly establishes Remick as a character trying to survive above all else, willing to let any real morals fall by the wayside in favor of preservation. Sure, you can make the argument that he's secretly woke or something because he then eats the clan members, but let us not forget that they quickly become part of his entourage, and he goes on to forcibly turn like 50 black people. I get ahead of myself though. Remick's next appearance comes when he's lured to the juke joint by Sammy's performance, the one we've been talking about all video. And the reasoning behind Remick's appearance now, of all times, tells us even more about his character. Remick shows up because, as we come to learn, even in his immortal vampiric existence, he is forever lacking in something. That kind of authentic, transcendent expression in community Sammy seems to so effortlessly tap into with his music. And this is where the particular vampire rules of Sinners start to matter. See, vampires in the film can't enter buildings unless directly invited inside. Sure, this is a staple of vintage vampire lore, but also consider the implications that has for the film, where our vampires are trying to gain access to basically the kickback of the century. It kind of plays on that meme about being invited to the cookout, instilling this idea that the vampires of Sinners cannot engage with the cultural connectivity that the film presents, at least not authentically. Or consider how the vampires act as a sort of hive mind once turned, every vampire gaining the knowledge of the others. It makes the vampires stand in stark contrast to the diverse cast of characters within the juke joint. Where those people each carry their own unique cultural experiences, the vampires are homogenized, assimilated into one shapeless blob. And better understanding how the specifics of Sinners' vampires entangle with the messaging of the film, it probably does us well to draw some real-world parallels and explore what this vampiric behavior presents as in everyday life. I think there's a pressure to write the vampires here off as embodiments of oppression, plain and simple. To say their methods of preying on the marginalized serve, in the case of Sinners, as a means of pitting our characters against representations of racism, classism, sexism, all the isms and obias, really. But I think it's impossible to make that kind of rigidly straight connection when you consider we already have complete embodiments of oppression in the film, the literal Klan, who pop up multiple times throughout the movie and make up a not insubstantial part of the finale. I'm getting there. Add to that the fact that Remick very clearly frames his cause as one in direct opposition to the Klan. Sure, we could read that as another lie told to weasel his way out of a tough situation, but if we are to believe that Remick's thoughts are really shared with all other vampires, it says something that when he, spoilers, turns characters like Mary and Stack, they don't seem to so much blindly follow him as simply agree with his position. Remick sells our characters on the concept of a life lived without fear of oppressive violence, essentially asserting that in a dog-eat-dog world, he can give all of our leads the bigger teeth. And I think what he says is true. But the film and our characters know that comes at a price. The price of a life lived hiding in the shadows, of leeching off others, and of giving up some intrinsic piece of the self. Remick might make his vampiric life seem glamorous, but the truth is, his whole reason for showing up to the juke joint in the first place was to try and fill a void in his undead life. A void he sees Sammy, without any vampiric abilities, overcome. If we truly comprehend the whole deal of vampires in Sinners, I think we can pretty clearly see them as stand-ins, not for Klan members or overt bigots, but for marginalized people seeking to use the same tools of oppression that hurt them to rise above. Yes, you heard it here. Sinners vampires are like the Tim Scotts or Caitlyn Jenners or Nikki Haley's of the world. People who, despite their own marginalized status, decide the best means of overcoming is through abandoning their identity, suppressing others, and joining an in-group. But don't let them see you enjoying your own culture because they're liable to get jealous and want to appropriate it for themselves. Vampires and Sinners claim to have real values, but will fold those values at the drop of a hat in order to get ahead. They pose like they're the party of free will, but really hate when you express a view they don't like. And so it shouldn't come as much surprise when I tell you the kind of pure artistic expression Sammy delivers, a kind of expression that thrives not on conquering, but on connectivity, something intangible beyond generations and racial, gender, and ethnic lines. It's an expression Remick needs to undercut. In part because it subverts his whole philosophy, in part because he secretly wishes so badly he could have it himself. And now we can return to our scene. Sinner's whole second act, immediately following Sammy's barn burner, pretty much revolves around the middle section of that scene, around what magical type of community Sammy is able to invoke as he plays. And while the scene doesn't directly bring in vampires or state that Sammy's expression is under threat, there is a palpable sense of dread looming over this middle portion of I Lied to You, a hint at the sinister forces waiting in the wings, lured by Sammy's art. The second Sammy finishes playing, Remick makes his true introduction. At first, the vampire tries to persuade, and then when that doesn't work, he takes a more forceful approach. Eventually, Remick is killing off some of the characters we spent damn near an hour getting to know. He's forcibly turning them into vampires and professing the whole time that his way is best, and that he acts out of a desire to help, to relieve pain. Yet, we're reminded in every hollow Irish folk song he sings that this is truly nothing more than a man once oppressed himself, trying desperately to gain some of his power and culture back. And I suppose Remick does pose a real threat. I mean, before the film is up, we get to watch him make short work of Mary and Stack and Cornbread and Annie and Bo and Grace and Perline and Delta Slim, not to mention all the juke joint attendants. But there was never really a way for Remick to win. Not because of plot armor for Sammy or because a bad guy can never come out on top, but because the very thing Remick can't capture in the film, community and connection, was forever destined to become his undoing. Because what he so strongly seeks to possess and tame and defeat is something impossible to define. It's beyond words, beyond visuals, it's just a feeling. And that feeling can't be beaten. In 2010, Kanye West released what many consider to be his magnum opus, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Kanye, in the years since, has become a figure not so dissimilar to the vampires of sinners. Someone clearly dealing with a lot of pain, both personal and institutional, who decided his means of escape was not community or authentic artistic expression, but instead becoming a piece of shit. Fuck Kanye. But as I watched Sammy's rendition of I Lied to You, as I got past his initial acoustic performance of the song, then made my way through the brain-melting genre fusion that occurs after the beat drop, finally arriving at the scene's closing moments, I found myself thinking of Kanye. See, Sammy's performance builds and builds until the juke joint around him symbolically falls in ashes to the ground and the instrumental fades away. What we're left with are mere vocals, so caked in auto-tune that any semblance of words all but disappear. Kanye does something very similar on the outro of his now classic song, Runaway. One of the Twisted Fantasy tracks, I'd argue, even with the slow erosion of Kanye, still stands the test of time. On the outro of that track, Kanye's vocals, buried deep in effects, become impossible to decipher. But in them, we find still emotion, feelings so strong that they don't really need words, or maybe more aptly, can't be contained by them. The message becomes clear. Kanye is the music. What we hear is his soul. I don't know if Sinners intended to parallel Kanye in this third act of our barn burner scene. But for me, it doesn't really matter. The auto-tune vocals here serve just the same purpose as they did on Runaway. They capture the feelings words cannot. When I hear this passage, I don't feel rushed. I don't feel pulled to so much decipher and pick apart. I don't feel pressured to overthink, but I do feel closer to grasping the point of this scene, to understanding what Sinner's barn burner moment is all about. That indescribable strength in artistic expression and the community it can foster. Sammy here merges with the song. He gives himself over to the art and allows it to lay bare, without description or any type of clear explanation, his feelings. The kind of feelings that fully break down our imagined barriers of identity and time. The kind of feelings that can't be commodified or absorbed. The kind of feelings Sinners, as a film, is all about. And as with the other two acts of Sammy's song, this final movement parallels nicely the ending of Sinners itself. There's kind of an unspoken tradition in the South. Well, maybe not tradition, more like a learned behavior, something I'd call the long goodbye. So, for example, I'm from the South, literally have never lived anywhere else. And when I was little, I was raised about half the time by my grandmama. Every day, I would get off the bus at her house, go inside to watch cartoons, play with my cousins, eat Star Crunches or whatever, the good life. And I do that up until my dad got off work. He would come pick me up, take me back home, and then some nights, if he didn't feel like cooking, we would go back up to my grandma's for supper. Probably like cube steak, mashed potatoes, green beans, and biscuits. Yeah, y'all, I was really about that life, cornbread fed. But after supper was finished and dishes were washed, we'd still stay up there for like an hour. Because the process of saying goodbye down here is like a multi-step thing. You say goodnight inside, and then you spend 15 minutes talking about what happened that day. Then you go onto the porch and talk for another 15 minutes about like the news or something. Then you go out into the driveway and talk for like 20 minutes about, oh, who's gonna take Ellie to soccer practice? I used to really hate the long goodbye. I thought it was like the worst thing ever. Love my grandma to death, but best believe if I have homework due and I'm sitting there for 60 minutes waiting for my dad to finish talking to her, I'm gonna get stressed. Doubly so if there was like a new episode of Adventure Time coming out that night. But over time, I've learned to appreciate the long goodbye. In no small part because it allows you to live in the moment. shed some of the pressures you feel to get X thing done or overthink your day. You just kind of enjoy the vibe. You drag it all out because you care. And deep down, you kind of don't want to go. You crave that moment of authentic beauty and connection. In a sea of praise for Sinners, the one critique I heard come up time and time again was with the film's pacing, specifically with how the movie ends like 3 different times, and sure, there's some truth to that. Sinners' finale sees Remick break into the juke joint, chase after Sammy, and eventually get surprised minked by Smoke, who we're led to believe just killed his brother for good. All the vampires die, the sun rises, bada boom, end of movie. Except psych, now we gotta watch Sammy go home to his evangelical father, watch Smoke get in a deadly shootout with the clan, and then we end on a glimpse into Sammy's future, where he successfully rejected his oppressive dad and managed to survive the persistent racism of his world to become a successful artist. Bada boom, end of movie. Except psych, again, there's a post-credits-ish scene, and now Sammy is old and being met with Stack and Mary, who, shocker, are still alive. And then Sammy asks Stack if the juke joint made for the best night of his life, and he says yes, and it's sad because then we get a montage of the beautiful moments that started the film, moments Sammy chose to embrace, but when Stack and his vampirism abandoned. Bada boom, end of movie. For real this time, unless you count the other post-credit scene where Sammy sings This Little Light of Mine. The movie ends a lot, you get the picture. But when I saw this in the theater, watched Sinners kind of drag on, it didn't so much feel like a pacing issue. In fact, it made a lot of sense. This is a film set in the Deep South, one that kind of takes its time and really stews in the moment, kind of a Southern thing at heart. And in keeping with that, this was The Long Goodbye. And at a certain point, just like with the auto-tuned end of Sammy's performance, I felt like the film was inviting me to abandon all my thinking, to instead just embrace the emotions it offered me. In fact, I think that's the point. The end of I Lied to You is that thing they could never quite capture, not oppressors or appropriators, not liars or false prophets. It is authentic, it is real, it is something you either feel in your bones or you don't. The end of Sinners as a whole is exactly the same. You could sit here and tell me that the movie adds a little too much at the end. You could tell me that the whole clan shootout is overkill, pun intended, Smoke's dying visions of Annie and his child are way too sappy, that the post-credits scene is unnecessary. But damn, if those moments aren't the parts of Sinners that hit me most. The moments of the film where I most gave myself over to the emotions of it all, allowed myself to just vibe with it. The parts where I got most invested, where I cried, where I felt something real and relatable. In a world where movies feel increasingly churned out by a factory, it was refreshing to sit in a theater, watch characters I'd grown to love, and kind of revel in the moment with them. To get that long goodbye. You know, I started this video with a comparison between music and movies. A comparison I find pretty fitting for a video about Sinners because it's a film that so tightly ties together the two mediums. Sammy's music feels like a parallel to Coogler's films, each a type of artistic expression, each reaching something transcendent and fostering community, each facing destruction or assimilation by those who could never fully understand it. It says a lot about a person, how they choose to engage with that type of art. It speaks to a worldview that kind of cuts down to the very core of us as humans. Do we seek to possess, or do we seek to celebrate? It's a dichotomy best reflected in Smoke and Stack, brothers who start the film stuck between lives of authentic connection and lives of ruthless domination, as I think we all are to some extent. Smoke ends the film fully adopting the former. He lays his guns down, rids himself of the power quest he's so let consume him, and finds peace with Annie and death, in a scene that I think will forever get me a little bit choked up. Stack, on the other hand, he chooses the latter, and pays the price dearly. Never able to see another sunrise, never able to spend another day like that one in 1932. Talking to Sammy after 50 years, the best he can offer is a hollow,
You know, we got every single one of your records.
before he and Mary walk out of the film forever. labeled as lesser, as degenerates, as sinners, under the thumb of a world that would never willingly see them as anything more, our two brothers take diverging paths. I think it's pretty clear which one is more rewarding. Already, in just the few months since Sinner's release, we've heard talks about possible sequels, all without the involvement or approval of Ryan Coogler, the director and writer of the film. It's become increasingly clear that some people look toward this deeply affecting and personal movie and see dollar signs. I suppose that's par for the course when it comes to those at the top. And I assume that will remain the case for a long time to come. But I'd argue the reason for Sinner's success is because those of us closer to the bottom reject that kind of ideology. For most of us, I think Sinners is something beautiful, something we'll never quite capture again. It doesn't invoke feelings of jealousy or confusion or possession. It just makes sense. It feels like it's been there in some shape forever, like it's a story we already know. It's in many ways like a performance by Sammy himself, that unique piece of art that's allowed us to come together, celebrate one another, and exist in a really beautiful moment. I would never discount anyone for honestly criticizing the film, but I do think it's one that if you get it, you get it. And if it sails clean over your head, don't know what to tell you. I can never forget going to see Sinners in a packed theater. All the conversations I had with people after I saw it about how good it was, or all the Sinners themed parties that sprung up in the movie's wake, for better or worse. The world is so damn pretty when you choose to spend your time making shit you love, living in the here and now, embracing empathy, and pushing back hard against the systems that try to bury you or erase your identity. The world is so damn pretty when you let it be that way. Sometimes I forget that. It's hard not to in a world where getting ahead by any means is labeled as the goal. But for this brief moment in 2025, I know better. And in years to come, when things get bad or I lose that vision, I'll let myself wander over to YouTube, search up a very special scene from one of my favorite movies, and in about 6 minutes, I'll remind myself of Sammy Moore and why he loves the blues. Y'all, I've been wanting to talk about Sinners since like damn opening day in the theater. This is a script I had cooking for like a month and a half in some way, shape, or form. And then the other day I sat down for like 10 hours straight, just pounded out all my thoughts into a rough draft, pause, and then that became the video you just watched. I say all that to basically just stress this is a movie I'm very passionate about and one I'm very, very happy to have gotten a chance to talk about today. As should be clear by now, Sinners is my favorite movie of 2025. I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people, but y'all, believe the hype. Sinners rules in every way imaginable. You probably don't need me to convince you of that, but I hope at the very least this video allowed you to better understand the film and what it's trying to say. If you enjoy what I cooked up here today, I would really encourage you to tap in with the rest of my channel. Like, comment, subscribe, watch more videos, all that YouTuber stuff, because this really is the kind of high quality work I put out on a consistent basis. I'm currently working on final edits for a new Scared of Sequels video. That's a series on my channel where I cover horror sequels, remakes, prequels, all that good stuff. Exploring the good, the bad, the leprechaun in the hood, and I have scripts in the works beyond that. I cover a lot of stuff on this channel, mostly music, movies, and sometimes animation, but you never know where I might branch out to next. Lock in for my financial advice videos. They're on the way. But yeah, subscribe. You're going to be getting good, diverse stuff. It's worth it. And if you want to support me in the absolute biggest way possible, definitely consider heading over to my Patreon. Link in the description and also on the main page of my channel. Special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. It is y'all support that keeps this channel alive and running. And a very, very special shout out to my patrons in the shout out tiers. Special thanks to Anya May, Onyx, Sophie Villarat, Alex Mirabal, and Grace. With that, I have been Ellie. Y'all have been wonderful. Yes, the girls are real. And until next time, bye.